rapid arrival of Tory policies. I mean, there's about one every half an hour at the moment, as if they've suddenly woken up out of their Lib Dem coma.
4.
I am absolutely accepting that at times I behaved poorly.
3.
Already the unions are pushing Labour to go further than the leadership wants to when it comes to workers' rights.
2.
This very large painting of the king looks like Charles has been in an explosion in a summer pudding factory.
1. We have liftoff.
Welcome once again to Planet Normal, the Telegraph podcast with Allison Pearson.
Hello.
And me, Liam Halligan. The UK's been basking in sunshine, co-pilot, some parts at least, which of course, because we're British, means that our daily weather griping, one activity in which we truly are world class, has instantly switched from, will the summer ever arrive, to, God, it's so hot, I can hardly breathe. Talking of the weather, Rishi Sunak continues with his frantic political rain dance, wheeling out a series of policies and statements designed to appeal to centre-right voters ahead of the upcoming general election. The very same voters he and previous Tory governments have spent recent years alienating as taxes have risen and border controls have collapsed. Sunak's government now wants to scrap sex education lessons for pupils under 9, with schools required to teach the reality of biological sex and banned from exploring highly contested, some would say insane ideas, such as the existence of 72 different genders. The Conservatives want the police to bring back stop and search to tackle knife crime, an approach which again will appeal to core Tory voters, if such a group still exists. And ministers are embroiled in a row with civil servants. Mandarins are refusing to publish data which records crimes committed by recent migrants broken down by nationality. In the meantime, you've landed a quite incredible interview, Allison, with some bloke called Kevin Spacey. Never heard of him. More on that to come. But let's start with the obvious. The first official portrait of King Charles, painted by Jonathan Yeo, unveiled this week. What say you, co-pilot? Do you like this new painting? Or do you think it got caught in the same wash as a pair of bright red socks?
You're such a Philistine, Halligan, aren't you?
It's red.
It is red.
I mean, it's just covered in red paint.
It could be symbolic. We'll talk about that. Before we discuss the art historic merit of this new portrait of the king, I was reminded when you were reading out your excellent introduction that towards the very end of the Blair era, when, you know, the wheels were coming off big time as they are now, there was one department, I think it was probably the Home Office, it almost always is, isn't it? And this reader wrote to me and said that basically they were sending out, the civil servants were just having some devilry and sending out all the announcements with a PS. The PS was PS, none of the above.
God.
That's where we are now. But yes, I don't dislike this portrait of the king. I think it's extremely difficult to do a royal portrait, you know, without ending up something that looks like a sort of stuffed pin cushion. And Jonathan Yeo is a rather subtle and interesting painter. It has to be said that this very large painting of the king looks like Charles has been in an explosion in a summer pudding factory. I mean,
that's the middle class version of my gag about getting caught up with the red socks, isn't it? Because of course I don't know what summer pudding is. Because I grew up on spotted dick and bacon and cabbage.
We've dragged you into the middle classes. Come on, we've got there now. We can reference Eton Mess. Actually, Eton Mess wouldn't be a bad name for the picture. I was wondering whether it was a sort of subtle joke about how red the king is, because Charles has always had a very, very high colour, hasn't he? And I wondered whether Jonathan Yeo was having some sort of joke about that.
Or some weird blood pressure gag or something.
Do you like it? I mean, what do you think?
I do, actually, and I'm being deliberately provocative.
Yeah, I know.
Just for the bants, as my kids would say.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it now. It is a really incredible piece of work. Jonathan Yeo, joking aside, highly respected. He did the official portraits of Tony Blair, David Attenborough, among others. And he's produced this absolutely vast painting. I think it's 8 foot by 6 foot or something, or even bigger. And not only is it doused in red, and of course Planet Normal listeners will have to look at the photo online if they haven't seen it already on the front page of today, Wednesday's Telegraph. Apart from the huge amount of red, which almost completely obscures King Charles's heraldic uniform with his medals and so on. So his face looks as if it's sort of floating in a sea of red, which is interesting, as you say, though his hands are less obscured by the red and his famous, in his own words, sausage fingers are there. But there's also this butterfly on his right shoulder to the left of the picture, which is meant to depict, the artist says, the king's
metamorphosis.
Not only that, but also his very acute and lifelong interest in environmental issues. King in the pink.
I think his face looks kind but sad. And I think it is, of course, coming out at a time when he has, taken over the great burdens of his mother and is, as we know, unwell with cancer. I think it's very poignant, although it does slightly look like, those end of the pier things where you go and stick your head through something and look like Pamela Anderson or whatever it is. What do men go and try and look like?
Usually Fred Flintstone or somebody with big muscles.
Exactly. I think it's good. I mean, I was thinking about which royal portraits are any good. And the only one I could think of was there's the amazing Holbein Henry VIII, isn't there, where he looks like absolute king of the bloody world. And the great Annigoni portrait of the young Queen Elizabeth II in that sweeping long black cloak in a kind of almost a sort of Tuscan landscape that those Renaissance painters would do with sort of beautiful trees and hills. My favourite painter, in case listeners are wondering, is Piero della Francesca. Go and look him up if you haven't seen him.
Very popular in the Welsh pit villages where you keep telling everyone you grew up. Right, let's move on away from this idle middle-class posturing to the business of the day, because this is a big political moment, isn't it, Alison?
Yeah.
We see now Rishi Sunak, I called it his political rain dance. He really is trying to make the political weather. I mean, just looking at the front of today's Telegraph Wednesday, two stories very much kind of, I wouldn't say planted by central office, but very much in keeping with this narrative that the Tories are trying to appeal to what we might call their core vote ahead of the election, a core vote, which is, as we've been saying for many, many months, years even, has felt really, really neglected for a long time.
Yeah, and as you say, Liam, playing to the base, should one still exist? We've had some fairly choice emails on that subject this week, so buckle up. I actually thought, I haven't had a lot that's positive to say about the Prime Minister, but I thought this Crossroads speech, not the Midlands soap opera, the Crossroads speech he gave on Monday, in which he basically laid out this battle between the Tories and Labour as the country faces what he described as its most transformational period in history. He made some very good points. And Chris Mason, the BBC's political editor, who I think is rather good and chipper, and basically Chris Mason at the press conference after the speech said to him, Rishi, are you saying better the devil you know? However bad this lot of idiots are, wait till you see the ones that are coming in. And Sunak actually said yes. And I think why this was quite clever, apart from the fact that he struck some very good notes and didn't do sort of stupid 5-point plans that are doomed never to have even one item ticked off, apart from inflation coming down, which never got anything to do with them anyway. But so I think why this was actually quite clever is because it was moving the conversation away, Liam, from how fed up are we with this government. So basically, they don't want a referendum on the government, which is clearly loathed and despised, as the most recent polls show. I think they've been down as low as 18%, but they're hovering around 2021, and really anything below 25 is very, very bad. So they're moving it away from a referendum on the government to the choice of two horses. Which of these guys do you actually want? And I think that's a very clever tactic, because that now puts the spotlight on how good do we really think this Labour government is actually going to be. How safe is our money and our defences going to be with them? And as we know, Liam, I think that I've been keeping an eye on it, but there is precious little enthusiasm for either Sunak or Starmer. It's the standoff of the Woodentops. And have we, this is a question for you, co-pilot, have we ever gone into a general election with two leaders who are so disliked by the public?
Yeah, it does seem to be a sort of contest of political pygmies, doesn't it, with all respect? When you, again, go back to 97, Tony Blair's personal ratings were off the charts. As you'll remember, Allison, we were both very much jobbing reporters at the time.
I followed him round.
Yeah. And John Major, John Major had his fan base. And the more John Major went round the country and talked to people, actually, the better he did. Of course, he still got absolutely walloped because the Tories had been there for so long and all the back to basics stuff and the sleaze stuff. And just because a lot of the country felt there was a really positive reason to vote for Blair. That was the difference. And Starmer's personal ratings are still woeful when you consider how much knocking copy there has been against the Tories, how chaotic the Tories have been with endless unelected leaders, certainly unelected by the country at large. Then it's astonishing that Starmer's ratings are personally as low as they are. And then you look at the front bench, a point that we've made for months. Starmer's front bench is nothing compared to Blair's front bench. Blair's front bench had some really serious people on it, whatever you thought of them and their politics. And it's interesting to see that Telegraph readers in the last week voted Gordon Brown the worst ever chancellor, not least because of his pensions tax raid. But he was a very substantial politician with clear ideas, which a lot of people found appealing. Robin Cook, Mo Mowlam, Jack Straw, Alistair Darling. These were really serious people coming into office. And yet, who could name almost any of Labour's front bench, apart from the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves?
I think we need to grab a few of them and get them on the podcast. What's that Liz woman? I like her. She seems not insane.
Oh, no, Liz Kendall is an exception, but she's not particularly known to the public. Look, Liz Kendall's Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, and I can tell you from having known her for many, many years, she knows a lot about, work, pensions, health. She was a special advisor in the Department of Health for a long time and, is as near to a policy expert, I think, as you've got on the Labour front bench. And yet she's not really yet a public figure, though I'm sure she will be. She did, of course, stand for the Labour leadership back in the day. And when I used to work alongside her on This Week on the BBC, she was called Liz 5% because that's how many she got within the Labour Party. But no, she's a substantial figure on, the kind of soft right of the party. A lot of the trade union brothers would call her a sort of, Blairite scum or whatever. And it's worth just saying, while we're on Labour, Allison, there was an important meeting that I don't think got enough air coverage and pick up in the papers. Earlier this week, the Labour top brass and the trade union top brass met at the Labour HQ in South London. And already the unions are pushing Labour to go further than the leadership wants to when it comes to workers' rights. So they're discussing things like the end of 0-hour contracts. Employees can appeal for unfair dismissal from their very first day in employment. More paternity and maternity leave, all very wholesome policies. But a lot of employers would say this is just going to, mean we don't take as many people on because already we feel that employment conditions are stacked against us, particularly small business owners, which of course are the lifeblood of our economy. So you're starting to see the early signs, Allison, of what will be a kind of permanent row between the Labour left, the campaign group of socialist Labour MPs, self-declared. And ironically, we've said this in the past, but the more I think about it, the more I think this point holds. If you want a Starmer government to be less radical, it's almost as if you want them to have a bigger parliamentary majority.
Yes.
Because if Starmer is beholden to 30 or 40 campaign group Labour MPs, if he has to please them, those hard left MPs, to get any of his business through the House of Commons, then they're going to want more sort of red meat. They're going to have to be thrown more bones in the form of socialist policies, which a lot of the public won't like.
There was, Liam, a rather poignant moment this week when on my Twitter feed up came a picture of John Smith, and it was 30 years since he died. Do you remember suddenly dying of that massive heart attack? And then, obviously heralding the Blair-Brown Pact, where I was present in Granita, the restaurant in Islington, on the night that they had their famous summit. But looking at the face of John Smith, it was very interesting. And lots of the comments were, I would say, from people across the political divide saying that was a person of real substance, whether he was the kind of views you had. You didn't doubt that he was a very serious figure who cared very much about the country. And I often think on our TV screens many nights, his daughter, Sarah Smith, is now the BBC's North American correspondent, and she looks just like her dad. And I do often feel, oh my goodness, how proud he would be of her, but also how different the country might have been if John Smith had still been leader. But as you say, Liam, we are seeing, aren't we, these rapid arrival of Tory policies. I mean, there's about one every half an hour at the moment, as if they've suddenly woken up out of their sort of Lib Dem coma. And we've actually, I think something very interesting coming from former Planet Normal guest Robert Jenrick this week, very much calling for a league table of migrant nationalities with the highest crime rates. And we're told that this is being opposed by civil servants, quite possibly because the blob might be rather afraid of what they might find if they started looking at the crime rates amongst migrants, if one was being cynical. And I think that we have this huge tension. It's run through this administration, really, that the civil service just does remain resolutely opposed to anything which hints that immigration is anything other than an unalloyed good.
This is what happens in the US, some parts of the US. Certainly it happens in Denmark, a very progressive country.
Yes.
And the league tables from Denmark show that crime rates of those from North Africa and the Middle East are far higher than those of Danish nationals when you're looking at recent migrants.
Yes.
And this clearly is potentially a very explosive issue. And yet we do need to put these figures out. I do think it's a legitimate inquiry to make. To what extent are recent migrants, in inverted commas, asylum seekers who, of course, are allowed to roam around freely and do, for the most part, whatever they like in terms of where they go and what they do, how responsible are they for increases in crime? I mean, that is a very legitimate inquiry, even if it's a rather uncomfortable inquiry to make. And to refuse to make it, and some civil servants would say, this is a bit of a confected row by ministers, and of course we'll do it, and you don't need an act of parliament to do it, we can just do it. It's become a story because it chimes with a lot of what we know. I mean, you and I know from cold, hard experience, talking to endless civil servants over many, many years, that there has been a lot of pushback over certain things. I can quote on what we call lobby terms. I can tell you at least 2 permanent secretaries have said to me how uncomfortable they are with the idea that a government that they are serving wants to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, or may want to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. And civil servants drag their feet when things are happening that they don't want to happen. At least some of them do. Some of the very senior ones do. And some of them then boast about it after the event.
Who are they, unelected officials, when every single survey tells us that people across the United Kingdom in all walks of life want immigration brought under control? And you described it, Liam, as an explosive issue. But the problem is we have been, I'm not going to use the word gaslighted, because we've had a lively correspondence about our misuse of the term of gaslighted. We'll be shortly, we'll be later, we'll be having several PhD dissertations in the emails on the origins of gaslight. But we have been brainwashed into thinking that this is an uncomfortable subject. It's an explosive subject. Don't talk about it because you'll be giving comfort to the wrong people. This is the idea that you're just going to lead to a rise in the far right. On the contrary, this is perfectly normal, decent people, absolutely fed up that the link, we hear so much talk about young people, including my own kids, struggling to find rental accommodation. So I think that this idea that this is a no-go area, and all these, civil servants, they all cycle to Barnes, don't they, in their bloody Daygler. Sorry, I was told off for being sweary last week. Let's cut that out. But,
Yeah, Barnes. What a rude word. What a rude southwest London suburb.
Richmond.
Oh,
no.
Don't need to be so offensive. Twickenham, back to you.
Twickenham, back to you.
Chiswicks.
Yeah, exactly. Chiswick. That's where they all live. They all gather there around Barnes Common with Rory Stewart probably in there, isn't he, with his magnolia tree. Anyway, these people do not speak I don't know what I'm talking about, but you know what I'm talking about. And by the way, I didn't get the chance to say this earlier. My fear, and I think one reason that the Starmer popularity figures are remaining stubbornly low is because I think we are potentially on track for the most socialist government we've ever had. And that fills me with dread.
Right, just before we move on to your wonderful interview with Kevin Spacey, I just want to mention very briefly, Allison, the economy, because in the last few days, when I've got on the tube, when I've been walking along the street, when I've been walking around the newsroom here at GB News, everyone is asking me about interest rates, housing market, where it's going to go, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted to say that there's news over the last couple of days. On the one hand, we've had quite a large uptick in UK wages. We've had the sharpest increase in real wages since September 2021. That's wages after inflation. Wages are up 2.1% after inflation in the first 3 months of this year compared to the same period in 2023. That makes it, Allison, that ongoing high wage growth makes it less likely that the Bank of England will cut interest rates when the Monetary Policy Committee next gets together. And also, we've just seen inflation in the US not come down, but go up on the most recent data. And that makes it less likely that the Federal Reserve in the US will cut interest rates. And then I think that makes it less likely that the Bank of England will cut interest rates. The next meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee is Thursday, June the 20th. And even if the next inflation number is quite sharply down, the number for April when it comes out next week, it may well be because of that high wage growth and the lack of rate cuts in the US that the Bank of England once again holds interest rates. So we may only get one interest rate cut before an election this autumn rather than 2 or 3, which the Tories previously were banking on. And that is more bad news, I'm afraid, for Rishi Sunak.
Now, co-pilot, I'm not going to pretend that this week's guest aboard the rocket of right thinking is exactly a resident of Planet Normal. He comes from another galaxy where he is a superstar. I don't really need to introduce you to Kevin Spacey, one of the greatest actors of his generation, if not the greatest actor of his generation, 2 times Academy Award winner for his astonishing performance in The Usual Suspects, which he got the Best Supporting Actor, and very, very soon afterwards won the Best Male Actor for American Beauty. Spacey is a casualty, I guess, of the Me Too movement. In 2017, when the New York Times had been flushing out Harvey Weinstein and his horrible misdemeanors, inspired really by the flood of stories that were coming out, encouraged by Me Too, a young guy called Anthony Ruff, an actor, came forward and claimed that Spacey had sexually molested him many, many years ago when Ruff was 14 and Spacey was in his late 20s. He says to me in the interview, in 4 days, my life was finished. And he lost everything, Liam, really. He was sacked from the Netflix series House of Cards, where he was giving the most monstrous American Yargo portrayal of President Frank Underwood. The offers dried up. He became an untouchable, really. He became a leper. They might as well have given him a bell and told him to go round through the streets shouting, unclean, unclean. Anyway, I have sort of kept an eye on the story, always vaguely felt, oh, no smoke without fire. There was a court case in London as well, which actually concluded last year. Spacey again was acquitted on all 4 charges of sexual assault and was really been hoping to pick up his work because he hasn't worked as an actor for 7 brutal years. And that hasn't really happened because of various things that I discuss with him. But what's happened in the last week or so is that Channel 4 brought out a documentary, 2-part documentary called Spacey Unmasked, in which they wanted to say that Kevin Spacey had abused them in some way, although the documentary admitted there was no evidence of any crime whatsoever. So it was really stirring and being very unpleasant. And Dan Wootton, on his podcast Uncancelled, did a riveting interview with Kevin Spacey about a week ago, a forensic, really, analysis of all the different charges against him. And I decided I was approached really to write a piece about Kevin Spacey with a view really, because you know me, co-pilot, I hate injustice. I really hate injustice. And this feels to me like a really monstrous injustice. So I recorded an interview with Kevin Spacey in his home in Baltimore. You'll be able to find that on the Telegraph website and in the Telegraph newspaper as a written interview tomorrow. Anyway, have a listen and let's see what you all make of him. Kevin, you've been acquitted in 2 criminal courts, one here in the UK, one in the States, and in a civil lawsuit where your accuser actually had to pay you damages. Now Channel 4 has broadcast this 2-part documentary, Spacey Unmasked, with 10 more guys making yet more accusations of unwanted sexual behaviour against you. What was your reaction to that documentary?
We only heard about that documentary very briefly before they decided to air it. And we had assumed, or I had thought, that after we had had the outcomes that we had in both the Anthony Rapp civil suit in New York City and the criminal trial, of which I was found not guilty of all the accusations, that they probably wouldn't pursue it. But they decided to go out and find other people to talk. And I know a lot of my friends told me that they had been contacted when they asked questions like, who are you talking to? And they were told, well, we can't tell you. And, you know, one of my friends said, I told the producer that, well, you couldn't be talking to any of his friends because we have incredible things to say about Kevin, what he's meant to our life, how much he's helped us, how he's been there for us. And you don't want to talk to us. And no, I'll be very interested in talking to you. And then, okay, well, when the trial is over and he's found not guilty, then let's have another discussion. And, you know, I'd be happy to sit down and talk to you about Kevin. I've known him for 25 years. And then the trial happened and the outcome happened and they called the producer and they never heard back from them. Clearly, they must have thought in 2022 when they announced that they were going to do this documentary that I was going to lose the rap case. And by the time the documentary came out, I'd be in jail and they would be really ahead of the curve. And here we are. But, you know, a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. And I think that perhaps because they had already at that point spent money, I think they just decided that they wanted to go ahead with it. And under the guise of having a conversation about inappropriate behavior, they kind of had they had an agenda, it seemed to me quite clear.
They only gave you 7 days to respond, is that correct, to this huge wealth of material?
Yes, that is correct. And I can only tell you that, for example, if the Anthony Rapp trial I only had 7 days before I had to walk into that courtroom, as opposed to what I did have, which was nearly 5 years of investigating what Anthony Rapp had accused me of, things that I didn't know in 2017, things that we uncovered, that we presented in that trial, facts, evidence, photographs, witness testimony, that ultimately proved that Anthony Rapp had told a false story, that what he claimed happened had never happened. I would have never had the opportunity to find evidence of that. And even since the documentary is aired, we've found evidence that has, at the very least, calls into question some of these allegations. And, you know, as time goes on and we continue to find what we can find, we will continue to put that out there so that at least the public might get the whole story rather than a one-sided one.
Do you think that in this era of cancel culture that the idea of due process, which was that if a man or woman was tried and found not guilty, that was it, you were not guilty. Do you think that respect for due process has now been lost?
In some quarters. But I have to tell you that, you know, if we put aside the media for a moment, because there's clearly a laziness in actually investigating stories that are printed, but if we just put that aside and we put the sort of Twitter world aside, Evan and I have traveled. We took this amazing trip a couple of years ago through Europe with backpacks like we were college kids. And we went to 12 different countries around Europe. I've spent a lot of time in England and the United Kingdom since a couple of years now, since 2019. I came back for the first time. I've been all over the United States. And we have been stopped sometimes 75 times a day. And people are so incredibly kind and generous. And if there's a theme at all to what they talk to me about, it's when are you going back to work? And I can tell you that I know that there are people on the internet who don't like me and never met me, but have very, very passionate views about me. But I've never met one of them in real life. There is a very, very large, quieter majority. The haters, the minority, are very loud, but I don't believe they are the majority.
So let's look at some of the specific accusations. So in this Channel 4 documentary, there is one young actor who appeared in an Old Vic production when you had obviously gone in and revivified the Old Vic. This guy was in The Sweet Bird of Youth in 2013. He claimed that you groped him in public at an after party held at the Savoy. He says he put his left hand down by my bum and he stuck his middle finger as far up me as possible. This is a guy called Rory. He says, I just totally froze. He pulled me in closer and in my ear he whispered, don't worry about it. What would you say about that? Is that true?
It's not true. You know, people have different motives for different things they do, but I would say this, if I can revert back to the Anthony Rapp story. When Anthony Rapp told his story, there were a number of people who came forward to tell another story, a different story, because they felt so strongly that Anthony Rapp was telling the truth. This story must be true. Well, it isn't true, and it wasn't true. And there were other stories that followed that also weren't true, or there were parts of them that were true, or they had been exaggerated, or not happened at all. And I can't really tell you what it is that motivates people. I think some people, you know, maybe think that they're helping and doing the right thing. And, you know, look, there's been, I think, incredible progress because of the Me Too movement. I think it started in a way that I think was incredible, because if you look at the amount of time that the New York Times and Ronan Farrow took to investigate, over a year before they printed the allegations against Harvey Weinstein, they knew what they were presenting. And so I think, again, it's just a question of, if you accuse someone of something, you have to give them an opportunity to be able to respond and to investigate it, and not do it in such a way that you don't allow them to actually have a fair shot at being able to prove that either something didn't happen or there are circumstances that make it questionable.
But you're not denying that there was never any truth to unsolicited body contact, flirting that went too far. You're not saying you never behaved like that, are you?
I am not saying that. I am absolutely accepting that at times I behaved poorly. And if anyone wonders, you know, why I would have done that, yes, you're right. I was involved in horseplay, and I was involved in interactions on set that were just fun, and I made a lot of jokes and, you know, sexual innuendos, and it was more common in those circumstances than it is now. And, you know, I might have been having fun because everyone was laughing, and that's what I wanted to have people do. But to have learned later in conversations I had with others, people that I worked with, that actually they felt I was belittling them or making fun of them, which was horrible to hear, because I never, ever wanted to do that intentionally. And those conversations have been really important, because I've then been able to have those conversations with my therapist and try to get to the root of why did I do that, and to make sure that in work environments in the future, I never, ever put myself in a situation where I ever hurt anybody or my conduct is questionable.
So Dorothy Byrne, who's one of the producers of this documentary, said that she hoped it would be a Me Too moment for men. What do you say to that?
I watched an interview that she did on Channel 4, and it seemed to me that this is a person who has decided that she's judge, jury, prosecutor, condemner. And she actually talked about these things as if they'd actually happened, when we know that they didn't, and we know that we're going to present evidence.
We should remind viewers and listeners that there were no allegations of criminal behaviour in that documentary at all. In 2017, when you were at the height of your success and in, being amazing in House of Cards, this guy you mentioned before, Anthony Rapp, accused you of making sexual advances to him in 1986 when he was 14 years old. And then you released a statement in which you said you didn't remember the encounter, but you were extremely sorry if it had taken place. And you also chose that statement to disclose that you were living as a gay man. Can you tell us why did you apologise, and do you regret now coming out in that same statement?
Well, there's no question that the two statements should have been separated. In my mind, in my heart, I knew that I hadn't done what he accused me of doing. But he backed me into a corner, because when you say, oh, you were so drunk you won't remember. I mean, look, the first thing that I think, if someone heard that, I'm accusing you of something that happened more than 30 years ago and you won't remember because you were too drunk. The first thing I did was not say, this person's lying. The first thing I did was go, what? Like, I had to look at myself and say, is it possible that? So I wasn't in a position at that point to absolutely deny it. I was also conscious of the fact, and there were lots of voices in my head actually talking to me, advisors and such, who were saying, you can't push back on this, you have to be kind. There was all kinds of pressure. And again, BuzzFeed gave us a few hours to respond to this 31-year-old charge before they went to print. And I'm not sure I could have done anything that would have been the right thing or sounded right. It even all sounded wrong to me. But also because what many people may not know, unless they watch the Dan Wooten interview, is that I had been talking about and planning about coming out for more than 2 years. So in my own mind, I had made the decision to come out. It's not that Anthony Rapp made me come out. It's that I was like, I was going to do this anyway. So let's just try to do something positive, because I knew I wasn't guilty. So I didn't connect the two things. And now, I understand now why it was seen the way it was seen.
The Gore Vidal film, which Netflix still hangs on to without either releasing it or being prepared to sell it to anyone else. Obviously, Gore Vidal was gay and did have a number of young male lovers. Are you disappointed that they won't release it in some form? And do you think it's because of the content that they may feel compromised by that?
Well, they certainly knew the content when they joined us and decided they wanted to produce the movie and believed in it and understood all the reasons we wanted to do it. I think they don't want people to see the film because people are going to ask questions about why did you run away from it? The movie is an excellent film, and the filmmaker and the crew and the other actors deserve to have their work seen. And I hope someday it does get seen.
Yeah, I'd really like to see you playing Gore Vidal. In the documentary, your brother Randy, I know you haven't seen him for a long time, paints a picture of your father really as a frightening figure, brutal, abusive, a Nazi sympathizer. Was there an element of shame, Kevin, in your reluctance to come out? I mean, given your upbringing, it would not have been approved of, would it?
No, but I was so young. I mean, I didn't know what I was. All I know is that there were times when my father would say things that were very homophobic and very upsetting, and I was certainly afraid of that. And I think that there were other things in my family that taught me very early on that secrets kept me safe. So that was automatic for me. It was just everything was to. Now I realize it didn't keep me safe, and I'm so much happier.
Were you close with your mom?
Yes, I was. Yes, I was. And in fact, my brother, as you probably have heard, has been pretending for a very long time that he and I were very close when we were children, that we bonded as kids. And in his latest interview that he's done in the Daily Mail, he actually at least admitted that he's truly only seen me about 5 times since I was 17 years old, which is something like 49 years. And, you know, it would be fine if he just decided he wanted to go on about me and say whatever he wants, because he's like a stranger. But this time he's gone too far. My mother was diagnosed with a very aggressive brain tumor in 2002, and she would eventually move down to Los Angeles, and I put her in a house with a full-time staff. And we spent a good amount of time together, me and her and the rest of our family. And my mother was very, very concerned about how she looked. She didn't have a lot of visitors come and see her because she just did not want people to see what the disease was doing to her. And my sister, my niece, we all protected my mother. She wrote to people, but she just didn't have many visitors, especially when the tumor started to become more aggressive. But now my brother, and I'm assuming he got paid for this because he always gets paid for telling nasty stories about me, has sold private photographs of my mother that were taken in this home she was spending her last days in order to try to bolster his comments about me. His selfish need for money and attention has made him do something that would have mortified my mother. He shockingly sold these photos. And to expose our mother in this way is beyond anything he has ever done. And I also remember, as I talked to my sister the other day, that when he came back for her funeral, he started taking pictures of her in the funeral home. And we both said, stop doing that. What are you doing that for? And he promised my mother and he promised us that those photos were just for him. And so he's despicable.
Yeah, I've seen one of the photos. It's very, very sad and really cruel. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm just wondering, after all the sort of public shaming, how you would approach personal relationships now. Do you feel that you would want to flirt with someone if you're sexually attracted to someone? Are you, do you have a big kind of no sign going up in front of your head? I mean, is any potential relationship going to be compromised by the fear of what's happened and that someone could quote it out of context or whatever?
I am so open to having a relationship. I'm so ready to have a relationship. And I'm not going to let any of this affect a genuine, loving relationship. I feel so fortunate because I'm in a different place, and I want to be able to take everything that has happened, all that I've learned, everything I've discovered, and everything I have yet to discover, from therapy, from people in my life, from friends, from going into myself, and I want to pour it all into my work, but I also want to make sure that I live a more authentic and open life than I ever have before, and that is what I'm determined to do. Well,
I think a lot of people are rooting to see you back. I'd like to say that the very best thing about the Channel 4 documentary Spacey Unmasked was Kevin Spacey, actually. All the bits with you in it were my favourite bits by far. Thank you so much for your incredible generosity with your time and for your honesty. Next time I see you on a screen, I don't want it to be this one, okay?
I appreciate that very much. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I'll see you down the road.
Well, I have to say, Allison, that was a riveting interview with Kevin Spacey. Obviously a huge name in a lot of pain, very heartfelt. And it strikes me that there's a head of steam now building behind almost a campaign to rescue him from the situation he's been in. As you say, has it really been 7 years since he hasn't been able to work in Hollywood and make films, and films that he has already made, like the Gore Vidal one, which you mentioned, have still not been released?
No, I was very struck, Liam, because you watched the full video of the interview, which Planet Normal listeners can find online, so you can actually see Spacey in person. You used the word vulnerable, Liam, and I thought, I was aware of that. Obviously, when you're doing an interview, I mean, it's at a distance, so it's not ideal. But I was aware that I was dealing with someone who, if not broken, was fragile. There were moments where he got very distraught, And, he was overcome. And there were times, I admit, when I wanted to cry. You know that way when people start crying and it's almost like a kind of reflex. You want to cry.
It's like a yawn, isn't it?
They're infectious, aren't they? Tears. And
Yeah.
I did want to cry with him because I, did feel his suffering so acutely. But, obviously I had to plough on. But I don't think there's a campaign as such. But what was very... let me give you an insight into my last 24 hours, because I've been kind of waking up about 4 a.m. and finding in my inbox messages from Sharon Stone, Liam Neeson, F. Murray Abraham. I mean, just all these kind of Trevor Nunn, Stephen Fry.
It's all right. Pass on my number. I know they've been trying to get hold of me. It's all right. Just pass it on. It's fine.
Sharon said basically, look, that Halligan guy, can you pass it on? But, they've been coming up with these very, very strong endorsements. So this is from Sharon Stone. No one's heard this yet. She emailed me, I can't wait to see Kevin back at work. He is a genius. So elegant and fun, generous to a fault, and knows more about our craft than most of us ever will. Of course, people wanted and want to be around him. It's terrible that they are blaming him for not being able to come to terms with themselves, for using him and negotiating with themselves because they didn't get their secret agendas filled. Fame is an ugly monster.
So what would you say, Alison? You've interviewed many, many big names, of course, big beasts of Hollywood and so on, and big beasts of politics. We've all got our kind of interview anecdotes and war stories, haven't we? What would you say to those who push back and say, look, he's a really good actor, Alison? The clue is in his name. He's Kevin Spacey. He's playing you. What would you say to them?
There were certainly moments in the interview because he's so beguiling. In fact, one of his accusers described him as being like Car, the snake, trust in me, snake.
Trust in me, in the Jungle Book.
Yeah. So there is definitely something mesmerizing, and he's so eloquent and wry. So it's a very charming thing. And there were moments when I'm thinking, of course he's acting. He's Kevin Spacey. But overall, Liam, I felt that it was genuine. I think he's very remorseful about his conduct. I think he came from a very brutal background. His father was basically a neo-Nazi. They had swastikas in the house. The older brother, Randall, claims he was sexually abused and raped by the father. Kevin seems to have been protected by the love of his mother, but he was a sensitive, imaginative little boy, and I suspect there's a lot to come out there. Maybe he'll never talk about it. But nevertheless, I think from quite young, he knew he was gay, but father made very aggressive remarks about gays. Kevin said he basically took refuge in secrets. He said, I became a keeper of secrets.
Secrets kept me safe, or so I thought. That was an amazing line from the interview. I'm really struck here because American Beauty is an astonishing film. It's one of my favourite films of all time. Apropos of nothing, a few months ago, I just rewatched it, having not watched it for 10 years or so, and it really does.
Does it stand up?
It absolutely stands up. It is of its time. It very much is a turn of the millennium portrait of turn of the millennium America. And what struck me listening to the interview was there was a crazy parallel, and this is complete surmise, but there are incredible parallels between the character in American Beauty. So obviously Lester Burnham is Kevin Spacey, and Annette Bening is his she almost steals the show from him, I must say, is the aggrieved wife with the matching gardening clogs and pruning shear handle. That's not a coincidence that they match. Wonderful. But a really important character in it who really, really struck me in my latest viewing is the father of Ricky Next Door. And the father of Ricky Next Door is played by a brilliant actor called Chris Cooper, sort of hatchet-faced, gravel-voiced,
wonderful,
sort of all-purpose, nasty American character. And Chris Cooper is, of course, a neo-Nazi. The character is a neo-Nazi. I'm not saying the actor for a second is a neo-Nazi, but the Chris Cooper character who plays a really overbearing ex-military father of the household next door to Lester Burnham and Annette Bening's household. Are there parallels between that character and Kevin Spacey's own father? It's very, very interesting. And of course, that Chris Cooper character is the person who ends up playing a key role It's an American Beauty. It's been about, I'll give a spoiler, who ends up shooting Lester Burnham in almost the last act of the film. Just wonderful, interesting parallels.
Because he himself was a repressed homosexual.
Yeah.
So he actually acts it out. And you do wonder, because of course, homosexuality can run in families. So you do wonder whether Kevin Spacey's draconian dad was himself gay. But this just leads into the fact that Spacey was hugely criticised in Hollywood because it was rumoured for a long time that he was gay. He wouldn't come out. He told Playboy magazine he was absolutely not gay. He told another interviewer he had a girlfriend, and he only came out, really unfortunately, in a statement when this guy, Anthony Ruff, had accused him of molesting him, a charge of which he was entirely acquitted, and Ruff had to pay him damages. So he really was not guilty of that. But in addition to saying, I'm very sorry if I did actually upset or hurt Anthony Ruff, he then said, and I am now living as a gay man. And it was a terribly unfortunate conflation of the two situations. And he was widely criticised for perhaps using his coming out statement as a sort of excuse for abusing a minor. So it's all very interesting. His manager, Evan Lowenstein, said to me he doesn't think Kevin is still at ease with being homosexual. And there's a long, long tail of the father's forbidding and terrifying influence. But coming back to the main subject of my piece, which appears in the Telegraph tomorrow, Thursday, he is a phenomenal actor. And I think he brings the secrets. The thing he said as a child, secrets were my safe place. He's a very secretive and a mysterious actor. And Liam, here's an interesting hypothesis for you. Was it that because as an actor, Spacey was known for playing creepy, sinister, scary characters obviously he was the killer in Seven, that really frightening film.
He was the deeply Machiavellian politician Frank Underwood in House of Cards, who was also a killer in the screenplay.
Yes, and The Usual Suspects, he was Kaiser Soze, so it's the sort of the weak loser apparently with a limp who turns out to be the criminal genius. But I wonder whether people thought, oh yeah, when these lots of allegations started coming out, accusers were coming forward, many of them he thinks spurred by the allegations are kind of catching. I have to say, Liam, he does say he thinks Me Too did a lot of good. So he's not saying that people shouldn't come forward with charges of sexual harassment. I just think that, he took the hit in all the hysteria. To give you an example, he always uses the word about what he was doing with some of these co-workers as horseplay. Now, that is a word to me from the 50s. That's an antediluvian word, isn't it? He just didn't get the memo. You don't just go and slap someone on the bum in your office or, grab the crotch of a young actor on your set. And did he exploit his power? Well, I think they all exploit their power. I mean, he would say not, but it's a mixed story. But just to bring it up to date, he has been acquitted on all charges in every case, in every court case, and they are trying to get him work. People are coming forward with fantastic parts in films.
Now on to our listener emails. Your messages sent to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk. Please keep them coming. We love to read your thoughts.
This is an email from Andy, which is a letter that he wrote to his MP. This is absolutely brilliant. Dear Kate, I believe you and a colleague stopped by my house the other day. I assumed to ask about the prospects of supporting the Conservative Party in the next election. Initially, I was glad I missed you, as I think my feedback would not have been very positive. I am planning to have some burning hot needles pushed into my eyes that day, and would find it very difficult to support. However, having listened to your colleague Andrew Rossendale on the Planet Normal podcast, I started to regret that and thought I should try to make some more positive feedback along the lines of what might persuade me to cancel my appointment with the eye acupuncturist and vote Conservative. Firstly, however, says Andy, if you're going to take my feedback seriously, I need to let you know just how really disillusioned I, and I'm sure many others are, and why. Not just with politics generally, but with the Conservative Party in particular. This is important, Kate, because if you don't understand how badly you are regarded by your core support, you might not make the radical change in direction required. This isn't a recent phenomenon either, as many would have you believe. I first voted in 1987, said Andy, and I voted for Margaret Thatcher. Based on my background, values and perspectives, I should have voted Conservative in every election since then, but I rarely have. I remember looking on in the 1990s when destructive concepts like political correctness and multiculturalism were bandied around, and the Conservatives did nothing. For the last 30 years, you have watched while the people of your country, your members, supporters, the people who raise money and walk the streets for you, have been called bigots, racists and homophobes in their own country, and you have sat there and done nothing. Some of you have even joined in, and you would still expect these people to turn out and vote for you if you offer them a few tax cuts. I've got news for you, Kate. Bill Clinton was wrong. When people feel that their culture and their whole way of life is threatened, it's not just the economy, stupid. In my opinion, if you are to stand any chance at all at the next election, you need to first come up with a new and compelling vision. For example, as well as freedom of choice, why not champion freedom from choice? The freedom to commit to something, either individually and collectively. Commitment is an essential ingredient to success, but it is hard for people to do. So we need a culture that compels commitment. At the moment, the UK is a commitment-free zone. If you want more information on this, says Andy, please let me know. I charge very reasonable rates for consultation, or at least I'm probably cheaper than Demonic Cummings. By the way, that's not a typo. I like Demonic Cummings. But even if you don't like that particular idea, you desperately need something to inspire and engage. Secondly, as Mr. Rossendale eloquently pointed out on Planet Normal, the view seems to be that even when in office, politicians appear not to be in power. I agree. In fact, my view is that the single most critical issue facing the UK today is lack of democratic accountability. If the people we elect don't have any power, then everything else is for the birds. For the Conservatives to have any chance of getting my vote later this year, they would have to commit to something like the following. Within 100 days of a new parliament, you would 1. Abolish the Climate Change Committee. By all means, keep whatever harebrained, anti-science, anti-human net zero commitments you want in your manifesto, although I wouldn't recommend it. Why would anyone believe that you can control the weather via a magical thermostat in the sky when you can't even control the country's borders? Abolish the OBR. Its forecasts, which are usually wrong, hold the Chancellor to ransom and mean that the budget is not under democratic control. Ironically, since the OBR was formed, the UK's debt, tax levels and public finances seem to have spiralled completely out of control and have never been worse. What's responsible about that? 3, take control of interest rates back from the Bank of England. Most people don't know who's in the Monetary Policy Committee, let alone get a chance to vote for them. It's not like they've been particularly good at it recently either. In order to do this, you don't need to change leader, Kate. That would be counterproductive. Besides, it's not leaders that are your problem, it is the Conservative Parliamentary Party. So, to make the above commitment credible, says Andy, I think you should reassess all your candidates for the next election and allow local associations to pick them. This could be your clause for commitment. Your proof to the electorate that you have learned your lesson and things will be different. You could do this now. To be honest, given the number of scandals recently with Tory MPs, would they really do a worse job? You have a few months to prove that in government you would do something bold, radical and very different. If you're not prepared to do this, then you should admit you don't have it in you and clear the field to let someone else have a go. Lead by example. Commit. Either come out fighting or don't bother coming out at all. Regards, Andy. Well, that's a letter that Kate, the MP, won't forget in a hurry. Brilliant.
This is from Richard. Dear Allison and Liam, my employer, who must remain nameless, has recently been encouraging me to use an artificial intelligence app to make me more productive. I was sceptical, but my hopes were raised when I found out it was called Copilot. Perhaps I thought if I click on the snazzy new icon in the taskbar, this app will dispense a dose of right thinking or reasoned views, all too rare in my line of work. Maybe it can offer insights that are orthogonal to the orthodoxy, hooray! Or provide me with an hour's respite from the madness of planet Earth. Alas, it's little more than a semi-literate buffoon that gets the most straightforward of facts precisely wrong and spends ages thinking before presenting you with a load of old cobblers. More fool me and Microsoft for thinking that AI could ever replicate any aspect of Planet Normal. As your 200th episode approaches, I'd like to congratulate you on making the finest of podcasts. Thank you, Richard. But it's more than a podcast. It's one of the few places in the media where I find proper investigative journalism, long-form interviews with thoughtful guests covering a range of views. Allison's political judgment, I think, is impeccable.
Yay.
Liam's ability to explain the role of economics in political and everyday life is unparalleled, and I've become something of a Velma myself, finding the subject more interesting than I'd ever have imagined.
Wow.
The rapport between the two of you is priceless. He obviously doesn't know us, and the sense of community among your listeners is, I think, unique to a podcast. Very kind of you, Richard. I wish I could be with you for the live show, but circumstances won't allow on this occasion. Please keep going, and I will hope to join you to celebrate episode 250 or 300 in the future. Best wishes, Richard.
You know, I read that earlier and it brought tears to my eyes.
Oh.
So what a lovely email.
Well, we do work really hard on it, don't we? And it's nice to get some good feedback.
Well, I do. Don't know what you do.
Nothing.
No, he said that you actually made economics interesting. I mean, really, you know. High praise indeed. This is from Nigel in Sweden. Allison and Liam, listening during last week's Planet Normal to Allison defending herself against allegations of being a conspiracy theorist, and Andrew Rossendale reflecting how power has moved away from elected representatives to process-driven civil servants and unelected taxpayer-funded bodies, led to a sudden eureka moment for me, says Nigel. Throughout COVID, I found it difficult to understand why the Labour Party in Parliament, far from questioning and opposing the Conservative government's disastrous lockdown policies, continually argued for tougher and more restrictive measures. After all, British Social Democrats' favourite country, Sweden, where I am fortunate to live, says Nigel, was providing a textbook alternative they could have seized upon. Boom! The reason came to me in a flash. Labour's cunning plan throughout was to expand the power of the state and its ability to reach into every aspect of people's lives during COVID, and to hell with the consequences, in preparation for the time when they assumed power. There you have it, says Nigel, a real conspiracy theory.
It's from Hannah. Dear Alison and Liam, for the first time, I'm seriously disappointed in you both.
No.
I'm starting to believe I'm the only living person in this country who's watched the film Gaslight and understand what the term gaslighting actually means. Gaslight's one of the greatest films of all time. Ingrid Bergman, Charles Boyer, Joseph Cotton, also Angela Lansbury's first film role, for which she received an Academy Award nomination.
Wonderful actress.
Ingrid Bergman won her first Academy Award for Gaslight and spent time in a women's mental health institute to study for the role, in which her husband uses what we now call coercive control to gain access to the house of her aunt and search for exotic jewels which have been lost for 20 years. It's a rip-roarer of a plot, and I watch the film regularly even now. Having started my passion for black and white films when very young, I'm still only 40, by the way. I recommend you put some popcorn in the microwave and set aside a couple of hours and enjoy. Brilliant film. But it drives me mad when people misuse the phrase. Regards, Hannah. Well, I'm a bit mystified because I've watched the film Gaslight, and in the plot, Ingrid Bergman is sent mad because her husband keeps dimming and brightening the gas lights without telling her, so she thinks she's going mad. But anyway, I bow to Hannah's greater film knowledge, and sorry that we've disappointed her.
Finally, on the same subject, a short one from Eve. Tickets all booked. Thank you for your wonderful event at the Cadogan Hall. So looking forward to it. But I have to pull you up on an unforgivable faux pas. The term gaslight comes from an old film, Gaslight from 1944, and not starring Ingrid Bergman, but starring Angela Lansbury, a relative of mine, says Eve. Goodness me, this is above my pay grade, Halligan. I think Ingrid Bergman is in it. But
She is in it. She won an Academy Award for it. Anyway, on that bombshell, that's it from Planet Normal for another week as we leave our sanctuary of sweet reason, our flying refuge of reason views. Email of the week, it's my turn. It's got to be Richard. So Richard, send us your home address to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk and put in the subject heading mug winner.
if you enjoy Planet Normal, please leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It does, believe it or not, help others to find us.
And finally, another reminder about our upcoming Planet Normal event, recording our 200th episode at the Cadogan Hall, close to the Telegraph's HQ in Victoria, central London, Wednesday the 29th of May, starting at 7 p.m.
Tickets selling very, very fast. Hot cakes. but there are still some seats left, so grab them while you can. Liam and I are so proud to have reached this milestone. We couldn't have done it without you, our wonderful and fantastic Planet Normal listeners. Truly special group we've got here. And we will, of course, be joined on Wednesday, the 29th of May, by two fabulous guests. Novelist extraordinaire Lionel Shriver will be talking about her terrific new book, Mania, and former Conservative Cabinet Minister and brilliant Telegraph columnist Lord David Frost, who has all the info.
As we speed away from our beloved Planet Normal and the madness of Planet Earth comes back into view, thanks as ever to our producers Isabel Bajard, Cass Ho, Louise Wells, and of course the Telegraph team who are working to bring that event to you on Wednesday, the 29th of May. Stay safe and in touch with us and with each other. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.